some say we should start on time. What say you? All right. Okay, so because of the amphitheater, it feels a little bit intimidating. Also, because there are probably coders in the room, it feels also intimidating because I was a coder and I know how good you guys are at finding the flaws. So be patient with me, because what I'm going to talk about today is something that is what I would like to call a little bit out there. I am and have been for a while an agile coach and agile practitioner. And this talk is part of my series on taking agile all the way up to 11. Some Spinal Tap fans in the audience? All right, a couple. Very good. So for those who know that, this is about turning it all the way up to 11. If we really, really wanted to be agile, what would that mean? And that's what this talk is about. All right, as we get started, let's see if this works. There we go. One way in which I would describe this is taking the concept of no estimates. How many of you know about the no estimates movement? Right? Good stuff. About half of you, maybe a little bit more. It's about taking no estimates all the way to the portfolio level. So what do I mean by portfolio level? Portfolio is where the biggest product decisions are made in a product organization, right? Like what projects to start, what products to create, where to invest, that kind of questions. And in that context, I want you to keep this vision in mind. Imagine that you could somehow 10x, the color isn't clear enough, but there's a 10 there, 10xing your company's profit or revenue through Agile and an AI-enhanced product development process. Keep this vision in mind. We're not there yet at the how, but just keep this vision in mind as we go through the presentation. Right, but before we can do that, we need to revisit reality for a minute. And many of you will be familiar with this. This is what a project plan looks like. For most of you, hopefully you don't need to look at documents like this anymore, but this is very famous Gantt chart. And it was the bane of my existence for a while. I'm what you would call a recovering project manager. So I did create my fair bit of these, and quite long, some of them. But of course, we know that these things are fiction. One would say even bad humor, because they don't really work. But when you think about the major product portfolio tools, like AHA, if you know that tool. How many of you guys are familiar with AHA? Well, some of you. Anyway, AHA is like a product planning tool. There's a bunch of functionality, among which a portfolio, one could call it roadmap or plan. But if you look at these two images, okay, that didn't go. There we go. If we look at these two images, a old school Gantt chart and a portfolio plan, you start to see the similarities, right? They look rather similar. And when you start to look at what we know about projects, this is Bent Fluvbieris. I'm probably murdering his name anyway. Somebody who wrote about how projects fail. He's also a student of projects. He's a researcher, has published a lot of articles on how projects fail. And he published this book relatively recently. And in this book, he says 99.5% of big projects fail in one way or another. Could be time, could be budget, could be benefits, or a combination thereof. 99.5%. I would say that's a pretty low success rate. Wouldn't you agree? I would even further say that it's hard not to do better. So here's the first problem that we face in portfolio management. We're trying to manage the future of our organizations with technology and practices that were old in 2001, and according to all the available data we have access to at the moment, don't work. And that's just problem one, because it doesn't stop there. When we talk about product, many of us have an idea that, okay, we should be adding features to our product to make it better, right? Who would agree with that? Raise your hand. Adding features to a product to make it better. Like, we don't want to make it worse, right? Well, turns out that according to some, that's Trustworthy Online Control Experiments by Ron Kohavi and others, only about 10 to 30% of changes actually add any value to the product. And they have all the data there. They did a lot of A/B testing and so on. But to add to that, not only that, only 10 to 30% add value, but we also have the problem that most product portfolio decisions are about increasing the value of the product by 5 to 10%, or in other words, make it slightly better with the new release. You know, add a feature, add a set of features, make it sell for a specific set of customers that we want to address. It's not transformational, is what I'm trying to say, right? And to illustrate that, you can just think of something like Microsoft Office or your favorite website, whatever there is, right? We're constantly adding features to slightly improve the value that the products deliver to the market, the customers that they serve. So we are then victims to what they call the Red Queen effect. Do you know what the Red Queen effect is? It's from Alice in Wonderland. And the idea is you have to keep on running just to stay in the same place. And that's what product managers do all the time. There's this idea of value depreciation, right? Like, your iPhone will always cost the same. It just comes with new features. That's why you buy the new iPhone. Same thing with Android or any other product, cars, Microsoft Office, and so on and so forth. That's the Red Queen effect. And then to top it off, we have this idea, it's called the project management idea, that keeps us firmly stuck in the space of trying to be predictable. Only one problem with that is that when you're focusing the way you manage your products on being more predictable, you don't have any bandwidth to add more value, because it's all about predictability. A lot of the product portfolios out there are managed through a vehicle we call projects. And the goal, the reason why projects exist in the first place, is for us to be predictable. So that brings us to problem number 2. When we try to maximize predictability, we forget about the real reason why we're doing products and product development, which is to maximize value. And then there is complexity. One of the key aspects, how many of you know what complexity is, like from chaos theory or complexity science? Are you familiar with that? Okay, so I'll just quickly do a very quick intro. Complexity basically says that at a certain level, you cannot predict future behavior, right? If you talk about simple models, you can always say what's going to happen next, right? Hello, physics, most of it. But then if you take it too far, for example, having multiple aspects, you increase the difficulty of prediction, like, for example, a double pendulum. It's still entirely predictable, just harder to predict because there's many movements being affected. Turns out that Edward Lorenz, studying weather patterns during the Second World War, created a computer model which then later on led to the famous butterfly effect idea that showed that there is, even with the same system, the possibility of having different behaviors. And in his original system, he had 12 variables. So he was trying to predict weather with the model using 12 variables. And he found complexity, meaning that the exact same or that's what he thought, the exact same model produces different behaviors. Later on, we found out that actually this Edward Lorenz created this Lorenz system. We find out that actually it's enough to have 3 interactive variables to create complex behavior. Complex behavior means that knowing everything about the past and the present of a system does not guarantee you can predict its future behavior. So complexity brings us this bigger challenge, which is that we can't manage based on linear predictable models. We need to manage based on systems that are highly adaptable and constantly being updated. That's the core of Agile, right? Like, how many of you guys are familiar with Agile? If you could raise your hands. Okay, almost all of you, great. Because in Agile, we have this thing called the feedback loops, right? And the idea is you need to have short in time, short feedback loops, and you need to constantly adapt. That's how you get your performance. So these are the 3 problems that we need to solve. We need a method that focuses us on outcomes and adaptability, not maximizing predictability. And this we will call Agile product management. We need an approach that tries to maximize value, and this we will call experimentation. And we also need near real-time outcome simulation to provide insights, this is the key aspect, that lead to adaptability. And this we will call AI-powered portfolio simulation. We'll go through that in a bit more detail, but here's the 10,000 feet idea. You need Agile product management and you need AI. And when I mean AI, I don't mean LLMs. I mean even simpler solutions like just basic machine learning models that you can use to forecast potential outcomes for your portfolio bets. And bets is the technical term. I'll talk more about that in a second. We need to have a process around value discovery rather than a backlog execution. In fact, I would argue backlogs are making us slow. That's the talk I presented at Øredev last year. We need things like kill criteria, remove code that isn't delivering value. How many of us fall victims to our own technical debt because we never really removed stuff that wasn't necessary at all, and then we need to account for it, till the end of time. And we need to enable experimentation and continuous learning. And then we need to bring in AI and portfolio outcome simulation, which allows us to learn much faster. I want you to think about this. Learning is the bottleneck to value. It is not execution. In fact, I would say the opposite. Execution, the focus on execution, does not help us to deliver more value to our customers or users. It does the opposite, because we end up doing, as Ron Kohavi illustrated in his data, we end up doing a lot of stuff that adds no value. By his own account, 70 to 90% of the work we do adds no value to our users. So more stuff is not the solution. And then on top of that, we have this idea that comes from Rebecca Humkis's book, Survive, Reset, and Thrive, where he looks at teams. She's a business researcher and lecturer, and she says successful teams don't just rely on facts. This is very important. So stick with me for a second. Hold your skepticism. They act on beliefs. And then she suggests we should all have a belief tracker to monitor and adapt strategies based on real-time learning and experimentation. She's here talking about businesses, not software teams, right? Because in product development or service development, we are optimizing a business. We are not optimizing a development process, right? This is very important. Okay, so I introduced the idea of bets. Here's what a bet is. Bet is a decision that has an expected value, we want something out of it, and a certain likelihood. You know, how likely is it that we get the value that we want? And I want you to keep this in short-term memory. Bets, right? There's an expected value and a certain likelihood. All right. So what does it look like when we find a method that focuses on outcomes and adaptability? So I'm going to show you 3 case studies from real projects. We can dive into the details after this talk. I'm just going to give you the overview of the case studies here. So this team, in about 2 weeks, a little bit more than 2 weeks, the first iteration was 2 weeks, and then they improved it, generated a feature that eventually delivered 420K in annual revenue. This team, after they delivered this feature, could go to the CEO and say, hey, we paid your salary this year. How many teams can say that? I mean, many teams can say we delivered on time, we did everything you asked, but how many teams can say we paid your salary this year? This is what we are talking about when we talk about 10xing your product, 10xing the profitability or revenue of your product. How did they do this? Of course, focusing on short feedback loops and value-driven criteria. This was the first project where we used the kill criteria. What is the kill criteria? The feature they delivered had different aspects, right? Like, I think it was like 4 aspects, but only one of them delivered value. The other 3 didn't. What did they do? They removed the code. Because you don't need to maintain, it's very cheap. The cheapest code to maintain is the one you didn't write. Which, by the way, it's also the cheapest to write, the one you don't write. We have been thinking about product development completely wrong all these years. We have been thinking that the bottleneck was how fast we could type, how fast we could deliver, how predictable we could be, and we forgot that actually the highest value products are the ones that have the less code and the more outcome, the more impact. And how does an approach that tries to maximize value generated, not work done, look like? Okay, this is an example I very often use in workshops with product managers to try to exemplify how most product managers work is actually detracting from the value that they bring to their companies. In this particular product, we changed the packaging. So how we offer the product to customers. And this is a digital product, so you can also imagine that packaging here doesn't mean the size of the box or the colors in the box, but rather how we interact with the customer at the start of the relationship with the customer, right? Like how we present the value, how we present the product to the customer. This was about 2-week change. It took a long while to get to the final number. It took about 3 months, but the main change was about 2 weeks. And we went for that product from around 300,000 euros of revenue a year to 5 million, about 5 million. But let me tell you what the real number for the team was. Before they started, they were generating around 842 euros of revenue per day. The daily metric here matters a lot, because we did experiments all the time. We were constantly reviewing the product and collecting data from the market. And then later on, when they finished the process for that particular change, we were at 13,698 euros per day. That's where the 5 million a year come from, right? And then they kept tweaking it and, of course, making the most out of it. This is not 10x, this is 16x with less than 3 months of work. 16x in revenue. And of course, the way we did this is by focusing on quick experiments, validated learnings from the market, and focusing on critical interactions with the customers. This is another one, the last use case or case study that I was involved in. I have one more as a bonus coming, but this was the last one I was involved with. This was about 1.5-year project. And one would say, wait a minute, that sounds like very much a waterfall project, right? 1.5 years developing. I would never argue for that. But we were starting from scratch. There was nothing when we started. So what did we do? Because we don't do, big bang deliveries. We do incremental deliveries. But when you don't have any code, you can argue, hey, but you have nothing to deliver. Well, that's not how we looked at it. In fact, we designed a lot of experiments during that 1.5 years. And the beginning of that process, actually, most of the experiments were around conversations. This is a B2B product, so we were meeting prospects all the time. And there was a business development team, and we were designing product experiments together with the business development team and the salespeople, collecting feedback directly from customers in with customers, interactively developing potential enablers for their business model, because our product was supposed to enable their business model. They would use this product to serve their own customers. And we developed this concept. We went from €0 in revenue at the start, of course, to 10 million revenue a year in 4 years, from 0 to 10 million in 4 years. But the key thing, the key aspect was that we developed, or our approach to developing the product was completely centered in this key idea, which we now call micro experiments. And we call it micro because when we talk about experiments, people usually think, oh, that's an A/B test or something like that, collecting data over a long period of time, which is true. That's what experiments also are. But we needed to call these micro experiments because the goal for us was not to collect data in large quantities, but rather to collect enough information to drive the next iteration of the product design. And we were doing this in conversations. For example, sometimes we showed prototypes, sometimes we showed paper prototypes. It depended on what we were trying to validate. But we were focused on getting feedback quickly because we didn't want to go 1.5 years without trying something concrete directly with the customers. So we call this, or we ended up calling this micro experiments. So the key takeaway here is that the goal for portfolio management, and again, what I call portfolio management, some of you will call the PMO office, project roadmap, and so on, right? But I want to focus on this. Portfolio management here is a key term. Why? Because portfolio is not about product development. In fact, where does portfolio come from? It comes from portfolio theory in investment. So the metaphor I want to give you here is that what we are trying to do is not to optimize project execution. In fact, I would argue what we're trying to do is to maximize the number of projects not done, because what we really want to do is to create a process that is designed around value creation. Just like when you invest in the stock market, if you put money to a stock and the stock starts going down, you don't put more money into it unless you have some private, insider information that it will go up very quickly. You trim your portfolio, and the bets, here's the technical term, the bets that don't work, you reduce the investment, and the bets that work, you put more investment in. Portfolio theory is established. We have all the mathematical models we want and need for it. It tackles risk directly in a way that benefits from risk. In investment, we look at risk as an indication of value rather than something to eliminate like project management does. And that's a very important perspective. All right. And now we come to problem 3. And problem 3 is where I need to bring in something that I would call turning agile all the way up to 11. We don't want to use estimates in portfolio management, because we already know they don't work in project management. So if they don't work in project management, why would we use estimates at the portfolio level? Also, when we use estimates, we are immediately in the execution mindset, the idea that more features equals more value. But that's not true. We know that. Ron Kohavi's book already tells us that 10 to 30% of changes add value, right? So we want to use a completely different approach. We want to go from hindsight. This is what most project management, risk management is, right? It's like we are trying to somehow predict what risks there are, but really the key is the mitigating actions we put in place in order to either eliminate or get out when they do happen, reduce the impact of the risk. What we want to focus on is simulating the future. And here's where AI really helps. And I don't mean AI as LLMs only. It could be something as just dynamic system modeling. This is an example. We're building this with Zestic AI, which is a company that does this for a living. That's what they do. They do simulation and process optimization using AI. And this is an example of a financial services company where if you look at the green area on that radar graph, is the data from all competitors, right? So if you simulate the outcome of a portfolio with data from all the competitors. What do you get? And then the red one is the data they had from their own product. And you see the big gap there, repaying your loan, that's a value opportunity, right? So with the use of simulation, we can find out what are the value opportunities for our product. And based on that, do what we call educated bets. So this is one of the books that I would definitely recommend everybody reads. Decision-making today in business is all about taking advantage of opportunities. It's always been like that, but I want to emphasize this. We make bets at the portfolio level. When we want to develop a feature or a new product or make a big change to an existing product, we're making a bet. Bet is an important term because when you make a bet and you see that you're going to lose, you take money out. How many of you guys do any, let's call it entertainment style betting, like in football matches or whatever? Not many of you do. Well, I would actually advise just put some money aside and start doing that, just so that you learn what the process is of putting a bet in a system and then adapting to the information that is coming up. Football matches are great because these days, with the systems that we have out there, you can make hundreds of bets even in one football match. Right? Like how many corners, how many red cards, how many yellow cards, the final result, how many goals in the first half. You can make many bets, right? And the cool part about this first-hand experience is that you start to understand what it actually means to make a bet. And when you transpose that to portfolio management, i.e. making decisions about your products, you start to realize that actually almost all of the decisions we make at portfolio level are bets. We think that something is going to happen, expected value, with a certain likelihood, right? The probability of that happening. So check out the book. Then another fundamental concept is how to remove risk. In project management, we are not focusing on removing risk, we are focusing on managing risk. But investors don't think that way. Investors gladly go into a risky opportunity understanding how to cap or limit the risk. Taleb's work on anti-fragility is amazing in that regard, so that's definitely a book that I would recommend. And then I would say, we already know how to make optimal bets. The Kelly criterion is something that is used widely in the investment world to maximize the potential value of an investment opportunity. Right? So how much money should I put into a bet should be a factor of how much money you expect to get back and also the risk of losing it. This is the Bayesian logic I was talking to you about. This is why thinking in bets is so important. We already have the mathematical models, not only to decide what's the best decision based on today's information, but to use simulation and AI-powered simulation in order to simulate potential futures. And as you run experiments, update your simulation, near real-time update of the simulation, in order to maximize the impact. This is why AI brings some amazing opportunities. Traditional experimentation is time-intensive, people-intensive. It is just slow product experimentation. So when we use AI and Bayesian-based simulation strategies, we can create multiple scenarios in minutes. And with every experiment we run, we can update those scenarios and we can learn more and we can get information, just like they do when they invest in the stock market. This is an important aspect to have in mind. So what we want to enable is rapid hypothesis testing and value discovery. That's what AI brings. And again, I mentioned AI here does not mean LLMs only. It can mean something like just dynamic systems modeling, Bayesian logic simulation, etc. All right, when I talk about these things, I always get two questions. The first one is, but will this work for my product? Right. Most important is, if we are able to think in bets and make decisions as if we were investing, this will work. This does not work if all we need to do is to maximize the amount of features delivered in a period of time. In other words, project management approach. We want to look at software as investment, and we want to look at product management as a portfolio of investments. Could be a feature or a new product, for example. And then another common objection I get is that, but 10x growth, that's unrealistic. Come on, can you really do that? Well, I just presented 3 case studies where that happened, and we can talk about more case studies. Those cases are out there. It's not even very hard to find them. What is hard to find is people that are actually trying to design their strategy for managing their products around this concept. What we want is to 10x the value. We don't want to just slightly improve it by adding another feature, because that changes the way we look at how we manage our product portfolio. And of course, if you didn't know about it, if you aim for 10x and you fail, maybe you only get 2x, but in any case, you get promoted, so it's not a bad bet, right? If you bet on project management, your success rate is going to be maybe 10% for small projects, 0.5% for big projects. So in the end, we have to finally acknowledge, I hope, that more code isn't the solution. This just came out. Google is already generating, according to themselves, the CEO said this, about 25% of their code using AI. So this is what I am asking you to consider. It's not too long before AI will eat our lunch. And this, I mean, literally. Adding more features to a product is going to be so cheap and so easy. I mean, assuming that the people doing it know what they're doing, that's sometimes not a very hard assumption. I mean, just look at the number of apps that are distributed on Google Play and App Store every single day, right? Like, how hard can it be to make them slightly better? So we are going to host 5 workshops about this method. Me and my team are going to host 5 workshops about this method. And it's only 5 because actually next year, there's an investment firm that has already bought the whole year from us. So we can't really do more than that. But if you are interested, come and talk to me right after this talk. And then we can make it happen. But it has to happen this year. It's not going to go next year. We're already full. The key question that I want to leave for you to consider is, are you ready to 10x your product development? Because if you don't, I mean, 5 to 10% improvement over 12 months, that's what most companies do. I mean, just look at their stock exchange releases. That's okay, 6 to 12 months, you're probably fine with that. But with advent of AI, it's unlikely to be more than that. So unless you have like a super easy to defend stronghold on your product or on your market, you're fine. But even then, what happens with AI? All right, so if you want to know more, just talk to me right after this session. We can bring this workshop to your team, but you really have to be ready to take it to the next level. This is not about optimizing project delivery. This is about transforming the way we do product management so that we maximize value. It's the whole vision that I started with, 10xing the revenue or profit of your product portfolio. That's what we are talking about. And it's perfectly possible. We've done it before several times. Thank you very much.